Welcome back. In this tutorial we're going to be creating a simple basic start of a damage system that you can build upon further and make however complex that you want. We're going to be making use of gameplay tags, damage types and containers to create a situation where we can make a little bit more interesting calculations for incoming damage for different characters. So in this case here I have this character which I can totally nuke like this, boom. This has now damaged all of the different characters in front of me here. So if I go and I check these characters, you can see that the character on the left over here, this character has lost 80 of its health. This is because we had a health of 100 to begin with, now we have 80 because this explosion did 20 damage to it. However, if we move a little bit to the right here and find the correct character over here, you can see this character over here is vulnerable to fire according to this property, and that caused it to lose 40 health instead of 20 like the other character. And then we can go to our third character over here as well, which is resistant to fire and therefore only lost 10 health instead of 20. So this is what we're going to be recreating and going through, so you get an understanding of how you can make use of damage types to create damage systems that are dynamically affected like this if you have different damage types sent as part of your damage in the damage nodes. So stay tuned. Welcome back. So in this tutorial we are going to be creating a basic damage system, or at least the beginning of a damage system. It can be much more proficient and complex than just basic if you continue with it, but I will be describing the process and how we can approach creating something that makes a damage system a little bit more complex and usable. So starting off, in this we are in the third person template, so we have a third person character here, for example. So this will be our sort of dummy for this test, and we ourselves, if we press play, we're also going to be a third person character. So both our so-called enemies and ourselves is going to be the third person character in this case, so we're going to be sharing logic in this blueprint. So starting off, I'm just going to be setting in some editor settings here and make sure that when we open in the main window, so it's a little bit cleaner. The basis for a damage system is essentially just two things. It's applying damage, and you can apply it, as you saw there, in a multitude of ways. I go through this in some other tutorials regarding damage. It's not so important for now, but we have a few different ones there. But we're going to be using the generic applying of damage. So this is how we send to someone that we're doing damage to them. On the receiving end, we have a event any damage taken. So this is the result from getting a message sent like this that is applying damage to us. So we're going to be sending damage and receiving damage, and then we're going to be handling that damage. To handle this damage, we are going to have a representation for a health system. So we're going to be creating a variable that will be called health. This is going to be very simple in this case, but in a different game you would have something a little bit more complex, but this just represents what that is. We're also going to be exposing this so we can actually debug and show what the values of this is going to be as we test this system. Okay, so starting off, we want to do damage to opponents. So let's create something very simple here. We're just going to be saying keyboard and the E key because I like the E key, and that's going to be our key to simulating that we are doing damage to something. In this case, I'm just going to be doing an area of effect, so everyone that's actually not even an area of effect, everyone who is meeting my requirement I will be doing damage to. So to do that, we're going to do a get all actors of class because we want to find all of the different third person characters. They will be, in this case, simulated to being damaged by me in some case. And the reason we're getting all of them is because we're going to have different properties on them and see how our damage system affects them differently. So looping on these found actors, we're then going to be saying, okay, let's apply damage to this actor that we have found, and let's say that the damage that we're going to be doing is just a generic value of 20, let's say. Okay, our health for our character, let's say set it to default 100. So we just have some baseline value to work with when it comes to health. So now that we do this, we want to be on the receiving end here and say, well, okay, we have our health. We want to subtract from this health the damage that is coming in here. And then we want to set our health to be this new value that we have now calculated, right? If you want a more advanced system, you can look at my other tutorials for health, or you can watch my Create an RPG series. It's a free series, it's a great series, you'll learn a lot of stuff. I leave a link in the description down below for it. But for now, this will be the simple system that we have, right? Okay, so doing this now, we have our one character here, and we have a different character over there. So if I press the E key now, we don't see anything happening, but we can go and see our third-person characters here. You can see that this is the character over here that is not our character, and we can find its information, which is going to be our health, and you can see that we have reduced it from 100 to 80 down here. Okay, so the damage application part works. What we might want to do is also say something like print damage done, just so that we have some kind of feedback that we have done some damage. Okay, so let's say we have done damage now somehow. Let's say we have cast a fireball on this character, or on all characters. It's a gigantic fireball. And this character now that we are throwing it on, let's actually write this out a little bit, do some drawing. So we have our character over here. It's a very pretty stick figure character. So this character is throwing a Kamehame fireball over here. And it's hitting our character over here, which is our unfortunate enemy in this case. So this enemy over here, he is actually resistant to fire, let's say. Now, how we're going to be processing and handling that is we're going to be making use of gameplay tags. If you're not familiar with gameplay tags, I will leave a description to a tutorial for that as well in the description, so that you can get the basics of it at least. So through gameplay tags, we will be representing this character as being resistant. And resistant in this case meaning that it will take reduced damage from a fireball in this case. A resistance could be something that it gets innately from being a certain race, or maybe from equipping a certain item like a weapon. It could be something like a temporary buff. It could be any of this or something else entirely. So somehow it has gotten this resistance, and if you want to have a framework to work around with, you can also check my RPG series for that. We do stats effects and stuff like that. But to represent it in this case, we're going to go to our third-person character, and we're going to be creating something called let's say, our properties. Our properties here will be of a type container for gameplay tags. So a gameplay, spell it correctly like that, a gameplay tag container. Gameplay tag container is just a container that consists of 0 to any number of tags in it, essentially. Okay, so with that done, let's create some tags we could actually make use in our project. So if we go to our project settings and we go to gameplay tags, we can in here go and manage our gameplay tags. And in here we can say that, okay, we have these different tags by default in this case. We want to add a new gameplay tag. So let's say we want to have something like damage.fire. So it's a category of fire, category of damage that has a subcategory of fire. Now we need to have a source selected for this. We'll just take this default tag here. That will be fine for our case. We press enter and we can see that we have gotten a hierarchy of damage and then fire. Okay, for now this is good enough. We can now say that we could go here and add this tag here if we wanted to. But in this case we are going to be portraying that this character is resistant to fire. So let's go back to our tags. Say we want to add some more tags over here. Let's say we want to add a tag called, and we have the same ini file here, and we say resistance.fire. And then while we are here, we can also say vulnerable.fire as well. So we have a resistance for fire and a vulnerable for fire. So two different tags that we can make use of. In our third person character now, we could go in here and say that, okay, we want to make this guy resistant to fire. This would affect all the different characters in the world, which is not really what we want to do for this demonstration purpose. So what we're going to do is we're going to expose this, compile, save, go out to a character over here, and this character over here is the character that when we play is going to stand in front of us. So this character is going to be our representation for a character that is resistant to fire. So let's add the resistance to fire tag to him over there. And now we go back to our character. So now we want to emulate that we are doing damage with a fireball to this character, and we want to see what the effect is. We're going to be doing this by the use of damage types. So a damage type is something that you can send into an apply damage node. And you can see that this is of a type class. So this is something that is immutable. You don't send in an object reference and have certain things set on it or anything like that. You have to send a class by itself, so it doesn't compute things by or carry things by itself as such. However, we can do some fun stuff with it regardless. Let's go and create a new folder. Call it damage type. So our damage type that we're going to be creating, we're going to right click, we're going to do a blueprint class, and we're going to search for damage type. Let's call this one damage type underscore fire. So this damage type by default looks like this. It doesn't seem to have a whole lot of stuff, but you have some defaults here you can make use of. These are pretty cool and can be used for certain things. For us right now, we're not going to be making use of them. What we're going to be making use of is just adding functionality to this damage type so that we can do some cool things. In our third-person character, when we get a damage message, an event sent, you can see that our damage type over here is of an object reference instead of a class reference. And this is because the object is created from the class that's being sent. So we can call functions and events and things like that on this class if we wanted to. However, this damage type that we're sending in here, in this case we're going to send the damage type fire that we created, but it could be something else. It could be something called the damage type ice or something. You could have different elements and such. You could have physical damage, magical damage, whatever you want to divide it into in categories. You could even have certain attacks that would be divided. So you maybe have a fireball doesn't just do 100% fire damage. It could be 50% fire damage and 50% blunt damage or something from the actual physical object. In that case, you would be sending in some of the damage in as a damage type blunt or physical, and a certain amount of damage as fire damage, and then it will be handled on the receiving side. So, because we can have multiple types of damage types objects actually handled here, and we want it to be sort of generic and clean in the code how we handle this, what we'll do is we'll create an interface. We'll create an interface by going to blueprint interface, call it BPI calculate damage. Inside of this blueprint, we'll create a function called calculate damage, and we'll say that we send in a value here saying starting damage, and then make it of a type float because that's what our damage type is. We want to have an output here that says it's a calculated damage of the type float as well. Now, if we go to our damage type, we can say we want to implement this interface. So we go to our implemented interfaces here, we add BPI calculate damage. Now that we have that, we get this function available to us, so we can double click on that and we can say we want to now somehow react to this. Okay, that's all good and fine. So now we get some starting damage in here, which in our case is going to be 20, and then we want to say it's going to be something else here. So for example, we want to know, is the character that we just shot with a fireball resistant? We want to mitigate the damage downwards. So for the calculate damage, we may want to also then have a properties set in. So this properties will be again a container for gameplay tags. And this will represent the properties of the character that is being hit then. So inside of this calculate damage function now, we can say that, okay, let's do a sequence node to keep this a little bit clean and disjoint it a little bit like so for now. And then we can say something like, okay, we have a properties container here. We can say hashtag to find if we have a specific tag of some sort. And we can say here, well, if we are resistant to fire, we want to react in a certain way. So let's put a if statement here. I do it by holding down B to get a branch. We can say here, if we are resistant, let's actually put it over here, then we want to affect the starting damage here to do something. So in this case, we want to multiply this. That is not the multiply. Let's change my language. There we go. Like so, and we go multiply. And then we say we want to multiply by 0.5. So we want to have it reduced by 50% in the case that we are resistant to, or the target is resistant to fire. So in this case, we want to save this value. So we'll do a promote to local variable. We can call this a local calculated damage. So in the case that is true, we want to mitigate the damage going from 20 to 10. Then we can add a pin over here, and we can say we want to leave here, and we want to say that the calculated damage is whatever we have locally calculated. Now we might have the opposite as well here. We might have this situation where we actually are vulnerable to fire. So in this case, we check hashtag and check if we're vulnerable to fire. If this is true, we send another branch here, and we say we want to do this. And in this case, we also want to multiply our damage. And we also want to save it in our local damage. And in this case, maybe we want to take the damage that we got to be increased by this. So now we might want to clean this up and say, okay, let's make a set over here. So we set the local damage in the beginning, like so. And instead of having this here, we just have our local calculated damage, have it over there. And then we also have one over here. And then we say, if we're actually vulnerable to fire, we should maybe take twice as much damage. So the numbers here are just made up numbers by me now. Doesn't really matter what they are in this test, but this is where you would tweak what kind of a multiplier you would have for these things. Also see that I spelled this wrong. Let's live with that for now. Anyway, so the idea here is now that in the damage type of fire, we will take into consideration properties that will affect the fire damage. So in the case of resistances and vulnerabilities, we would have that, for example. If the thing that we hit was something that is flammable or for some other reasons could be affected, then we could check for those containers as well, or those gameplay tags as well, to check is the damage going to be increased or reduced. Is it maybe a water elemental that we're shooting? Maybe it doesn't have resistance to fire but immunity to fire or whatever. So then it could reduce the damage to 0 or something. You all put the fire related calculations inside of this and it will handle it. So in the third person character, when we're actually taking the damage now, we can say, well, on the damage type here, calculate the damage. This will call the interface that we've created. And it wants to know, well, what are my properties? In this case, we have created this container which represents the properties of the character, so we send them in here. And the starting damage is going to be whatever damage that we get in here. So now we have a situation here where we get the calculated damage over here, but we can't just automatically set it to our health. But because we could have certain damage types that don't implement this interface, for example, or some other reason. So we can't actually be certain that we get an output from here directly. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that this damage type, or sorry, not the damage type, but that the damage type does sorry, my bad. We wanted to check the damage type to see if it implements the interface that we just created, which is the BPI calculate damage. Because in that case we know that it's implemented, and in that case we know that we want to run this code and change the damage output. So we put the branch here and we say, okay, does it have the interface? Yes, it does. Okay, run that. Does it not have the interface? We run the regular code that we had before, which is essentially just saying reduce our health by whatever damage that we're getting in. In this other case, we're going to be doing the same code here, like so, keeping it separate just for clarity's sake. And we're going to say that calculated damage is this instead. So now we have created a situation where we have this, we should be running through this calculation of damage in the case that we are either vulnerable or resistant to fire, right? And we set this character over here to be resistant to fire earlier. And we saw that when we pressed our key, it lost 20 hit points before when we tested. So now if we run this again and we do damage, as you can see, actually, let's make sure that I didn't double press there. Okay. Check our character over here. It says 80 damage. This character over here is the character that we made the resistant. It says 90 damage, or 90 health, sorry. So we can see that our own character here got hurt for 20 damage. Our other character that is resistant got hurt by half. If we were to remove this resistance and put it as vulnerable instead, actually let's see if it's actually saving resistance and vulnerable to fire. Okay, so now we press the key, we go here, we check, not that character, but that character, and we can see that it got its health reduced by 40 instead. So now already we have the bare minimum of having damage being a little bit more interesting, a little bit more calculated depending on what situation we have. The things that we have skipped, of course, here is things like damage detection, who is supposed to be hit. Instead, we just have this simple mock-up that represents this. We don't have an ability that's doing advanced where different parts doing different amounts of damage and things like that. That would have to be added, of course, as well. But at least now we have the ability to say that, okay, we figure out what an attack has as a damage type. We send the damage type. The recipient will take that and say, depending on my situation or properties, I will calculate that damage and have my health represented as being reduced or increased depending on the properties that is available in my specific container, which is individual. And it doesn't even need to consider what kind of damage type it is because it runs an interface, so it looks a little bit cleaner. We don't have to check, is it this fire damage, do this, if this ice damage, do this. We just keep it fairly contained this way. Now, from here you can of course expand this further. You could do systems like having multipliers for, I don't know, if we had a shooter, you could have damage for different limbs and things like that. You can have different complexities when it comes to your stats and such things as well. If you want inspiration, again, you can check the RPG tutorial series that I have in the description. We do a pretty big framework that's pretty flexible and usable for all kinds of stuff, and I teach a bunch of different things there. It's very usable and very effective as a learning resource, I think. Anyway, I hope that this starter of a damage system was useful. Keep on learning. Take care. A big thank you to all of you who like, comment, subscribe and share my videos, or through other means support this channel. You are what makes this channel grow and become a resource for other people to learn from.